down now, Victoria! I'm gonna make you pay for this, Marcus!
Take it, Victoria. Here is the deed. I never want to see this again. We are done.
This waterfront belongs to the entire community, Mr. Harris. Victoria Brennan's voice cut through the August morning like a blade. I looked up from the boat lift motor to see her marching across my property with 4 strangers trailing behind. Her fingers stabbed toward my grandfather's boathouse. You can't hoard a natural resource while families with children have nowhere to swim. It's selfish, it's un-American, and frankly, it's disgusting. She stopped 15 feet away, designer sunglasses perched on highlighted hair, her posture radiating the kind of aggressive confidence that comes from never being told no. She wore white linen pants and a coral blouse that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The 4 guests behind her, people I'd never seen before in 7 years of living here, shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing they'd been dragged into something awkward and potentially illegal. One couple clutched expensive fishing rods still in their retail packaging. A middle-aged man in pristine boat shoes kept his eyes on the ground like he wished he could disappear. A younger woman held her phone uncertainly, as if debating whether to start recording. Lake Hartwell stretched behind me, mirror smooth in the oppressive Georgia heat, completely indifferent to the confrontation unfolding on its shore. "This isn't a community resource," I said, keeping my voice level despite my heart hammering. "This land has been in my family since 1972. My grandfather, Thomas Harris, built this boathouse with his own hands after 30 years working for the railroad." Victoria's smile was razor thin, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes and suggests she's already 3 moves ahead in a game I didn't know I was playing. "I understand you have sentimental attachment, Marcus. We all treasure family memories. But we live in a community now, a modern community, with shared values and collective needs. Pine Ridge Shores HOA represents 87 families, hard-working families with children who deserve access to recreational amenities. Surely you can appreciate that children need safe places to learn to swim and fish? That families need connection to nature?" Her tone dripped false warmth, hiding steel underneath. I'd spent 12 years as a mechanical engineer on offshore drilling platforms, dealing with managers who confused authority with expertise. This was the same energy. "I understand property rights," I said, pulling out my phone. "The deed is registered with Paulding County. The boundaries are surveyed. This land is separate from Pine Ridge Shores, which means your HOA has no jurisdiction here." One of the guests cleared his throat. "I didn't realize this was private." Victoria told us this was the community waterfront access. Victoria waved dismissively. "There are nuances to waterfront law, riparian rights, public access provisions, community benefit clauses. My attorney reviewed everything thoroughly. We can reach an arrangement, perhaps weekend access? 6 hours on Saturdays and Sundays?" "No arrangement is needed," I said firmly. "This property isn't part of your HOA. Never has been. I'm not opening my family's land to unrestricted access." Her expression hardened. "I hope you'll reconsider. Living in a community requires accommodations. Good neighbors cooperate. I'd hate to see you become known as the person who denied children access to nature." The threat hung in the humid air. She was putting me on notice. Cooperate or be ostracized. Victoria turned to her disappointed guests and told them to leave, that she'd discuss alternatives at the next board meeting. They filed back toward the street, relieved to escape. Victoria paused at my property line and glanced back. "Think about what I said, Marcus. Community spirit goes both ways. You might need your neighbor's goodwill someday." Then she was gone, footsteps fading down the gravel path. I sat back on the dock, looking at the water. A kingfisher dove from a dead tree. Somewhere in the reeds, a bullfrog croaked. This place had been my grandfather's sanctuary. He'd passed it to me 5 years ago with one clear instruction. "Some things you don't compromise on, son. Property rights are one of them." I thought about the safe in my office, where I kept the deed, the survey maps, the title insurance. Everything was legal. The waterfront sat on 4.2 acres that predated Pine Ridge Shores by decades. When the development was built 7 years ago, this land wasn't included. It couldn't be. But Victoria's certainty bothered me. Not because she had merit, she didn't, but because of how she delivered the ultimatum. I'd seen this pattern photographing pack dynamics in my engineering days. The alpha always tested boundaries first. My phone buzzed. Robert Chen, my neighbor 3 houses down. Everything okay? Saw Victoria leave looking angry. I typed back, just a misunderstanding about property lines. But it wasn't a misunderstanding, it was the opening move. 4 days later, the email arrived. Subject line, Community Waterfront Access, Formal Request. I opened it over morning coffee. The tone was formal, almost legalistic. The HOA was requesting I sign an attached agreement permitting residents to use the waterfront. They'd included a schedule, 8 hours daily, 7 days weekly, rotating time slots for different families. The 3-page attachment outlined rules, liability waivers, maintenance responsibilities, and a clause stating I'd retain nominal ownership while granting permanent recreational easement rights to Pine Ridge Shores HOA. At the bottom, a signature line and a deadline. I read it twice, then checked the sender, Victoria Brennan, HOA president, with 6 board members copied. No mention of the attorney she'd claimed, reviewed everything. Just assertions wrapped in civic duty language. I sat back, considering options. Ignore it and delay the confrontation? Respond in writing and risk being taken out of context? Or call Victoria directly? I chose the phone. She answered on the second ring, bright and professional. I told her I'd received the email. She launched into an explanation about how the board had discussed the marina situation at length, consulted their records, and believed a formal sharing arrangement was the best solution. Families need recreational spaces. Surely you can appreciate that? Victoria, this property isn't part of the HOA, I said calmly. Never has been. The deed predates your neighborhood by decades. The survey maps show the boundaries clearly. There's no legal obligation for me to share this land. I heard the shift in her breathing. She insisted their attorney had reviewed the situation thoroughly and identified a community benefit clause. Then I'd like to see that legal opinion in writing, I said. The actual statutes, the attorney's name and bar number. Long pause. I'll check with our legal counsel and get back to you. The conversation ended stiffly. The next day, things changed. A neighbor who usually waved suddenly looked away. Another couple crossed the street to avoid me. Robert texted a warning. Victoria had been posting in the neighborhood group chat, painting me as uncooperative and selfish. According to Robert's screenshots, she'd written that I was hoarding a natural resource and that my attitude reflected poorly on community values. The comments ranged from supportive agreement to uncomfortable silence. No one pushed back. By Friday, it escalated. I went to the waterfront in late afternoon and found 5 people fishing from my dock. 2 men, 2 women, a teenager. Gear spread everywhere. I approached politely. Do you realize this is private property? One man, mid-40s, Sunburn shrugged. Victoria said it was open for community use. That's not true, I said. You're trespassing. You need to leave. He bristled. We were told this was shared space. Everyone has access. The others nodded agreement. I kept my voice level and repeated they needed to go. The teenager muttered something about me being uptight. One woman said it was just fishing, that I was making a big deal out of nothing. They eventually packed up slowly, reluctantly. Before leaving, the sunburned man told me I should reconsider my attitude, that I'd regret being so rigid. Later, I found evidence. Discarded cans, a broken tackle box, footprints. It was clear this wouldn't stop. That night, I ordered security cameras industrial grade, weatherproof, motion activated. If this continued, I'd have proof. I spread the documents across my desk, the deed, the surveys, the tax records. My phone buzzed with another text from Robert asking if I was okay. I told him I was handling it, but the truth was I hadn't slept properly in days. The quiet lake no longer felt peaceful. It felt watched. This was only the beginning. The emergency HOA meeting notice arrived Tuesday. I wasn't a member, but they'd summoned me anyway. The email said the board needed to address a pressing community issue regarding shared resources. I debated skipping it, but ignoring the situation wouldn't make it disappear. The meeting took place at the community center. I arrived 5 minutes early and found the room packed 25 residents, maybe more, seated in rows facing a table where Victoria and 5 board members sat, like judges, one empty chair in the front row. Obviously for me. I took it, setting my folder of documents on my lap. Victoria called the meeting to order, moved through standard business quickly, then pivoted to a matter of significant concern. A resident, she said without naming me, has declined to share a valuable recreational resource. The waterfront could benefit every family in Pine Ridge Shores. She described how children needed safe places to fish, how property values would increase with water access, how shared resources fostered neighborly spirit. She opened the floor for comments. Hands shot up immediately. A young father said his kids had nowhere safe to fish. An elderly woman talked about how communities thrived when people shared. Another resident said hoarding private spaces reflected poorly on neighborhood values. No one mentioned property rights. No one acknowledged the land wasn't part of the HOA. They spoke as if access were a moral imperative. Victoria nodded sympathetically at each comment, occasionally adding observations about community cohesion. When someone suggested legal complications, Victoria smoothly cut them off, saying their attorney had confirmed options existed. She never produced documentation, never named the attorney. Just kept asserting authority. When she finally asked if I had anything to say, the room fell silent. I stood, folder in hand. The waterfront sits on 4.2 acres deeded to my grandfather in 1972, decades before this HOA existed. The property has its own survey, tax assessment, and title insurance. It was never part of Pine Ridge Shores. HOA bylaws don't apply. I held up the documents. I have the deed. The survey maps. 52 years of tax records. Everything is legal and publicly available to verify. Victoria's jaw tightened. Thank you for sharing your perspective. But legal technicalities don't erase moral responsibility. We're not questioning your paperwork. We're questioning whether it's right for one person to control access to an entire lake. She proposed the board draft a formal sharing agreement. Then she moved to vote a resolution encouraging me to cooperate or face consequences, including social exclusion and formal complaints to county authorities. The vote was quick, 18 in favor, 3 against, 4 abstentions. Robert was one of the no votes. The resolution passed. Victoria smiled like she'd won. I left without a word. Within 2 days, a coordinated social media campaign appeared that was clearly planned and professionally executed. Save Our Lake Access featured drone photographs of the waterfront. Someone had actually hired a drone operator to fly over my property alongside carefully crafted text about a wealthy property owner who refused to share natural flighted in the sense resources with families and children. The language was designed by someone who understood libel law, carefully avoiding direct accusations of wrongdoing while implying greed, selfishness, and antisocial behavior at every turn through clever word choices and strategic omissions. Comments piled up from people inside and outside Pine Ridge Shores, most of them complete strangers who knew nothing about the actual legal situation or property history, but felt entitled to judge me based on fragments of information filtered entirely through Victoria's biased narrative. They called me selfish, entitled, greedy, heartless, the kind of rich person who hoards wealth and opportunity while children suffer and families struggle. Someone had even found an old article from an engineering trade magazine about a project I'd worked on and posted it with a caption about the profound hypocrisy of an engineer who designs public infrastructure while actively denying public access to his own private property. Robert tried defending me in the comments section, pointing out with admirable patience that private property actually meant something in America, that I wasn't legally obligated to share my family's land, that Victoria's narrative was deliberately misleading. Victoria blocked him within an hour and deleted his comments, then posted a response suggesting that anyone defending me was either related to me or complicit in my campaign of exclusion against working families. The propaganda machine rolled on without any interference or fact-checking. More photos appeared daily, the boathouse from multiple angles, the dock, the shoreline, all taken from boats on the lake since nobody could legally access my property to photograph from land. More manufactured outrage. More calls for me to do the right thing and think about the children and be a real neighbor instead of a property hoarder. My reputation, carefully built over 5 years of quiet, respectful living in the area, disintegrated within days. People I'd never met, would never meet, who lived in different states and had no connection to Georgia or Pine Ridge shores, felt entitled to judge me, condemn me, vilify me based on carefully curated fragments of information that told only the story Victoria wanted told. Then came the night someone cut my gate lock. I discovered it the next morning. The padlock lay in the grass, cut clean through. Worse, there were already people there, more than 15 spread across the property, like a public park. Families with picnic blankets, kids running around, adults setting up grills. They'd brought coolers, folding chairs, fishing gear. It looked coordinated. An older woman saw me and waved cheerfully. Victoria organized a community gathering. She said you'd finally agreed to share. "This is private property," I said, voice calm despite rising fury. "I haven't agreed to anything. You're trespassing." The mood shifted. A man in his 30s stood up. "We were given permission by the HOA president. You can't harass people enjoying a peaceful afternoon." Someone pulled out their phone and started recording. This is the property owner threatening families for enjoying nature. I kept my distance. "This is private land. You need to leave." A teenage girl called me a jerk. A woman said I was being unreasonable. I called 911, explaining the situation while people watched and whispered. Some started packing up. Others stayed defiant. Deputy Martinez arrived 20 minutes later. He listened to both sides, checked my documentation, and confirmed this was private property, but the damage was done. Victoria had weaponized the community against me. As the stragglers left, one looked back. "You'll regret this. The neighborhood will remember." I stood alone afterward, looking at the litter scattered across what had been pristine property just hours before, plastic cups floating in the water near the dock, food wrappers caught in the reeds, cigarette butts ground into the wood planks my grandfather had laid 50 years ago, sunscreen bottles abandoned in the grass, charcoal from their grills staining the earth black. My grandfather's sanctuary, the place he'd escaped to after brutal 12-hour shifts, the refuge he'd built plank by plank with arthritic hands. The legacy he'd trusted me to protect had been invaded, desecrated, turned into a public dumping ground. And I knew this was far from over. Victoria wouldn't stop. She'd tasted power, wielded a mob, and discovered that most people would follow anyone who spoke with absolute confidence, regardless of whether they had actual authority or any legal right to do what they were doing. But here's what I didn't know yet. What I couldn't see coming through my rage and exhaustion and sense of violation. The real cost wouldn't be measured in broken locks or hateful social media posts or legal fees. It would be measured in something far more personal, far more irreversible. Something I'd lose, that I couldn't get back, couldn't replace, couldn't repair with lawyers or lawsuits or righteous vindication. My grandfather had stood his ground against developers and county officials and neighbors who wanted things from him. He'd held this property through economic downturns and zoning fights and constant pressure to sell or share or compromise. He'd been admired for it, respected for his principles, remembered as a man of integrity. But he'd also died alone in a hospice bed, with only me sitting beside him. No wife to hold his hand in his final moments, no children or grandchildren except me to mourn him, no community that had rallied around him in his last days. Just his property intact and his principles preserved, and an overwhelming, crushing solitude that had defined his final decades. Was that the life I wanted? To win every battle but lose everything that made life worth living? To be right at the cost of being connected? Saturday morning arrived with oppressive heat. Around 10:30, Robert texted, "Community Fishing Day, your place." I grabbed my keys and drove to the waterfront. Cars lined the access road. People, maybe 40, spread across my property. A banner read Pine Ridge Shores Community Waterfront Day. Canopies, grills, kids running. This was organized, planned. I parked and got out. Conversations didn't stop. No one looked guilty. Victoria stood near the center, clipboard in hand, directing people. Her husband beside her, arms crossed. I walked toward them. "This is private property, Victoria." She looked up with practiced surprise. "The community organized this to demonstrate the value of shared recreational spaces. Families deserve access to nature. Your refusal has forced us to take a stand." "Show me the deed," I said, pulling the document from my pocket. I held it toward her. Victoria glanced at it, then deliberately knocked it from my hand. The deed fell into grass. "Old paperwork doesn't change reality," she said. "Property laws evolve. You're clinging to outdated notions that have no place in a thriving community." Her husband stepped forward, voice low and menacing. "You need to be careful. Making enemies of the entire neighborhood won't end well. Think about how vulnerable you might be if nobody's on your side." The crowd formed a loose circle around us. I felt the pressure of their presence. I pulled out my phone and dialed. Explained to dispatch that I had approximately 40 trespassers. The situation was escalating. Victoria laughed. "The police will see a peaceful community gathering. They'll understand who's being reasonable." 25 minutes later, 2 patrol cars arrived. Deputy Martinez stepped out. I handed him my deed, survey map, tax records. His partner asked Victoria for documentation. Victoria produced a printed email claiming their attorney had confirmed community benefit rights. Martinez asked for the attorney's name and contact information. Victoria hesitated. "I'd have to check my records. This is becoming ridiculous." Martinez's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, based on the documentation provided, this is clearly private property. Everyone is trespassing. Leave voluntarily or face citations." People started gathering their things, murmuring, casting glances at Victoria like they'd been misled. Victoria's face flushed red. "This isn't over. We have rights. We won't be bullied." Martinez warned that organizing trespass events could result in charges. Victoria pointed at me, hand shaking. "You'll regret this, Harris. This neighborhood will remember." Her husband pulled her toward their SUV. She resisted, still insisting they were right, but eventually went. The crowd dispersed. Within an hour, the property was empty except for me, the deputies, and trash everywhere. Martinez advised me to post clear signage, document everything, call immediately if more incidents occurred. This is harassment. It'll likely continue until she either gives up or faces legal consequences. I thanked him and picked up my property deed from the grass, brushing off dirt. The paper was creased but intact. I spent the afternoon cleaning, photographing debris, reviewing security footage that had captured everything. I backed up files to 3 locations and started drafting an email to a property attorney Robert had recommended. The war was declared. Time to fight back. But that night, lying awake at 2 a.m., staring at water stains on the ceiling that I kept meaning to fix, listening to the air conditioner rattle and the house settle around me, I started questioning everything that had seemed so clear and righteous just hours before. Was I really going to sue neighbors over a property line? Destroy Victoria's entire life, her reputation, her position, potentially her marriage over access to a boathouse? My grandfather had stood his ground. Yes, had fought every battle that came his way, and won every time. But he'd also lived alone for 40 years after my grandmother left him, had never remarried, never developed close friendships, died with only me at his bedside because he'd spent decades burning bridges in the name of defending boundaries. Was that the life I wanted? To win the battle but lose everything else that made life worth living? And Victoria, I'd been so focused on her as an adversary, as a threat to be neutralized, that I'd never really thought about who she actually was beyond the HOA president title. Robert had mentioned once, months ago, before all this started, that Victoria's daughter had special needs, required constant care and expensive therapies, that the family had moved to Pine Ridge Shores specifically because it was supposed to have community amenities, including lake access. That Victoria's husband traveled constantly for work, leaving her alone with everything. Was the waterfront campaign really about power? Or was it about a desperate mother trying to give her daughter something approximating a normal childhood, trying to create opportunities for a kid who spent most of her time in therapy appointments and doctor's offices? Was Victoria's aggression born from malice, or from the crushing weight of trying to be everything to everyone while slowly drowning under expectations she couldn't meet? I didn't know. I'd never asked. I'd been so certain of my righteousness, so focused on defending what was legally mine, that I'd never considered the human cost of winning. Malcolm Rivers practiced property law from an office above a coffee shop on the main street of Dallas, Georgia, in a space that smelled like espresso and old books and leather. When I walked in carrying my messenger bag full of evidence and my portable hard drive, his expression shifted from the polite professional interest he probably showed every potential client to something sharper, more engaged, genuinely attentive, in a way that suggested he recognized this case was different. I laid out my documentation the way I'd learned to present engineering specifications, systematically, logically, completely, letting the evidence tell its own story without unnecessary embellishment. The property deed from 1972, crisp despite its age, my grandfather's signature still visible and confident. The original survey maps showing exact GPS coordinates and boundaries with the kind of precision that left no room for interpretation or dispute. Tax records proving 52 continuous years of separate assessment, an unbroken chain of ownership that predated the HOA by decades. The timeline of events starting with Victoria's first confrontation and ending with the community invasion, each incident documented with dates, times, witnesses. Then I opened my laptop and played the security footage I'd compiled into a highlight reel, 17 separate incidents edited into a 10-minute presentation that told the entire story without narration. Victoria cutting through my gate lock with bolt cutters at 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning, organizing the invasion with clipboard and walkie-talkie like she was coordinating a military operation, refusing to leave when asked, her husband making thinly veiled threats about what might happen to someone who alienated an entire neighborhood. Malcolm paused the playback on a frame showing the Pine Ridge Shores Community Waterfront Day. Banner stretched between two trees. The crowd spread across my property, the coolers and grills and folding chairs that made it look like a sanctioned community event rather than organized trespassing. He leaned back in his leather chair, and for the first time since I'd entered his office, he smiled, not the polite, professional smile lawyers give clients, but something genuine that reached his eyes. "This is documentary-level evidence, Mr. Harris. Seriously impressive documentation. We have clear, indisputable proof of criminal trespass, systematic harassment, defamation through coordinated social media campaigns, and possibly fraud if she fabricated legal authority, which it appears she absolutely did. I can work with this. More importantly, I can win decisively with this kind of evidence package." We spent the next several days building the case like I'd build an engineering project, defining objectives, gathering supporting data, analyzing weak points, developing contingency strategies. Malcolm walked me through the essential protocols without drowning me in legal jargon, how to organize video files chronologically, how to capture screenshots with visible metadata, how to compile witness statements that would hold up under cross-examination. The breakthrough came when we reviewed the Pine Ridge Shores HOA bylaws that Malcolm had requested from the county clerk. We spent an entire afternoon going through the 37-page document line by line, searching for any clause or provision that might support Victoria's claims about community access to external properties, about riparian rights or benefit sharing or any of the legal theories she'd been citing with such confidence. There was absolutely nothing. Zero provisions for shared amenities outside the development's recorded boundaries, no community benefit language, no mechanism for claiming access to external properties, The bylaws explicitly limited HOA authority to properties within the plat map, which my waterfront wasn't on and had never been on. Then Malcolm made phone calls, every law firm in Paulding County, then expanding to surrounding counties. None of them, not a single one, had ever been retained by or provided counsel to Pine Ridge Shores HOA. The attorney Victoria kept citing with such confidence didn't exist. She'd simply made it up, counting on the fact that most people wouldn't verify her claims. Malcolm's expression turned grim. This is fraud. Deliberate fabrication of legal authority to intimidate you into surrendering property rights. That's not just a civil matter. That's potentially criminal, and it's absolutely actionable. He drafted a cease and desist letter, 12 pages demanding immediate cessation of all trespass, harassment, and defamatory activities. If Victoria didn't comply within 7 days, we'd file civil suits and criminal complaints. 4 days later, Robert texted that Victoria had called an emergency board meeting. People were questioning whether they'd been given accurate information. Malcolm advised me to attend the next regular HOA meeting to present our case publicly before filing in court. Give them a chance to see the truth. Sometimes, public vindication is more valuable than a judgment. I practiced the presentation late into the night, but as I refined slides and checked evidence, doubt crept in. These were my neighbors. People I'd see at the grocery store, at the gas station, for years to come. Was I really going to publicly destroy Victoria in front of everyone? What would my grandfather say? He'd fought his battles, yes, but he'd also died alone. The meeting room was more crowded than before. 23 residents filled chairs, more standing along the back. I arrived with Malcolm, both carrying equipment. Victoria sat at the head table with 4 board members. Her husband stood against the back wall. After standard business, Victoria addressed a concerning development. She characterized my actions as aggressive and retaliatory. Malcolm asked if I could respond. Victoria reluctantly allowed 10 minutes. I connected the laptop. Title slide, Property Rights and Legal Facts. I showed the deed, 4.2 acres, recorded 1,972. The survey map with my land in blue, the HOA in red. No overlap. Tax record showing 52 years of separate assessment. Everything I'm showing is public record, I said. Anyone can verify this. The property was never part of Pine Ridge Shores. I displayed Victoria's email demanding I sign over access. She claimed their attorney reviewed everything. I asked for the attorney's name. She couldn't provide it. My attorney called every law firm in Paulding County. The attorney doesn't exist. She made it up. The room stirred. Victoria said nothing. I showed screenshots from the social media campaign. Georgia law is clear about defamation. This meets every legal standard. Then I played the video. 17 incidents in 5 minutes. Victoria cutting the lock, organizing the invasion, the banner, her husband's threats. All in high definition with timestamps. When it ended, silence filled the room. Victoria stood abruptly. That video is fabricated, manipulated to destroy my credibility. Malcolm calmly explained all footage had been authenticated by a forensic analyst. Metadata proved it was unaltered. Victoria pointed at me, hand shaking. "You can't do this. I have community support." But when she looked around, she found only averted eyes. A man near the front said quietly, "I never agreed to breaking locks, Victoria. You told us this was legal," a woman added. "You said there was attorney approval. If the attorney doesn't exist and the property isn't part of the HOA, we've been misled." Another resident stood. "If we've been trespassing based on false information, we're exposed to legal liability. This needs to stop." Victoria turned on them. "You're abandoning me? After everything I've done for this community?" One board member made a motion to remove Victoria from her position. Another seconded. The vote was swift, 4 in favor, 1 opposed. She'd been removed. Gerald, the acting president, apologized to me on behalf of the HOA. He acknowledged they'd operated on false information and promised no further trespass would occur. Victoria stood frozen, staring at the people who'd voted against her. She grabbed her bag and walked out. Her husband followed without looking at anyone. People started talking in low voices. Several approached to apologize. I accepted without elaboration. But inside, I felt profoundly hollow, like I'd swallowed something toxic that was slowly eating through my organs. I'd won. The victory was complete, and public, and legally binding. But looking at Victoria's face as she left, the shock giving way to comprehension, the betrayal as people she'd considered friends voted against her, the complete collapse of someone's entire identity in real time, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like I'd just watched someone's life detonate in slow motion while I stood there with the matches in my hand. I'd wanted justice and boundaries respected. I'd gotten both, but the taste was bitter and metallic, like blood in my mouth after biting through my lip. This was what winning felt like when you actually paid attention to the casualties. Robert came over after most people had left, his eyes conveying relief mixed with something else I couldn't quite read. Concern? Maybe? Or pity. I knew something was wrong, Marcus, but I didn't realize how far she'd gone, how completely she'd fabricated everything. You did what you had to do, did I? Or did I do what my grandfather would have done? Consequences be damned, principles over people every single time. Malcolm packed up our equipment while I stood looking at the empty head table where Victoria had sat an hour ago, absolutely certain of her power and authority and the righteousness of her cause, however misguided and illegal it was. Now she was gone, her position stripped, her tactics exposed as fraud and systematic harassment, her life fundamentally destroyed in front of everyone she'd tried to lead. The reversal was complete and devastating. We left together, walking out into the Georgia evening where the air finally felt less oppressive, where I could breathe without feeling like I was drowning. But I couldn't shake the image of her face. The moment she realized she'd lost everything. The morning after the meeting, I woke to 17 missed calls and dozens of texts. Apologies from neighbors. Reporters wanting interviews. I deleted the reporter requests. Malcolm called to discuss next steps. 3 options: sue Victoria personally for damages, file criminal complaints, or settle privately with strict conditions. Whichever you choose, Malcolm said, I recommend filing the criminal complaint regardless. Creates a permanent record. I chose option 3 with the condition the complaint got filed. The settlement negotiation happened 5 days later in a neutral conference room at a downtown law office, all glass walls and corporate artwork and uncomfortable leather chairs, designed more for intimidation than actual sitting. Victoria arrived with her husband, still her husband then, though that would change within days, and their attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Reeves, who looked deeply uncomfortable with her client's situation and the evidence she'd been shown in pre-negotiation discussions. The atmosphere was frigid and purely transactional. Everyone sitting across from each other at a long conference table with untouched glasses of water that nobody drank because this wasn't a social call or friendly negotiation. This was damage control for Victoria and vindication for me, though neither of those things felt as satisfying as I'd imagined they would during all those sleepless nights. Malcolm outlined our evidence with the methodical precision of someone who knew he held all the cards and didn't need to bluff. Video footage time-stamped and authenticated, social media screenshots archived before deletion was possible, witness statements notarized and ready for deposition, police reports documenting every incident, the complete absence of any legitimate legal authority for Victoria's actions. Patricia Reeves countered weakly that some actions could be explained as misunderstandings rather than malice, that community leadership involved difficult decisions that sometimes led to overreach, that pursuing this aggressively through full civil and criminal proceedings wouldn't ultimately benefit anyone and would just destroy lives unnecessarily. Malcolm didn't argue or engage with a deflection. He simply presented our settlement terms, non-negotiable and comprehensive, a written apology to be read aloud at the next HOA meeting, taking full personal responsibility for the harassment and acknowledging explicitly that all claims about legal authority were completely false. Removal of all defamatory social media content followed by posting a public correction and apology. Payment of $25,000 covering my legal fees, security equipment cost, property damage, and cleanup. A binding legal agreement prohibiting Victoria from coming within 500 feet of my property for 5 years, with automatic lawsuit filing if violated even once. Victoria's face went pale as Malcolm read through the terms, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Patricia asked for a private conference, and they stepped outside into the hallway for what turned into a 30-minute discussion. I could occasionally hear through the glass walls raised voices, Victoria's protests, Patricia's firm responses about legal exposure and criminal liability. When they returned, Patricia said they'd agree to everything except the public apology requirement. They'd prepare a written statement to be read by someone else at the HOA meeting, which would accomplish the same goal without the additional humiliation of making Victoria stand up there herself. Malcolm shook his head calmly, but firmly. The apology must be delivered in person by Miss Brennan herself, in front of the same community that witnessed the accusations and harassment. That component is completely non-negotiable. You can either agree to these terms as presented, or we file the full civil suit tomorrow morning and push for maximum criminal prosecution. Your choice, but you have 5 minutes to decide. Another private conference. Another 15 minutes of tense discussion in the hallway. Finally, they agreed to every single term without further modification. The paperwork took 90 minutes to finalize, every clause reviewed and negotiated, multiple copies signed and witnessed and notarized. Victoria signed each page mechanically without looking at me once, her hand moving across the paper like she was signing her own death warrant, which in a sense, I suppose, she was at least the death of who she'd been in this community. When everything was finished and properly executed, Patricia Reeves collected the documents quickly, and they left immediately without pleasantries or final words. Victoria walking out with her head down and her husband's hand on her elbow, guiding her like she might collapse without physical support. Malcolm told me I'd handled everything exactly right, firm but not vindictive, focused on restoration and protection rather than pure destruction. But I wasn't sure I felt anything except exhausted and vaguely ill, like I'd just witnessed something I couldn't unsee or take back. But that night, I got a call from Robert that changed everything, that made all my moral questioning suddenly concrete and immediate. "Marcus, you should know something before you hear it through the neighborhood grapevine. Victoria's husband left her, filed for legal separation this afternoon. Took the kids, took their daughter, Emma, the one with special needs who needs all those therapies. He's claiming she became obsessed with the HOA presidency, that the waterfront campaign consumed her, that she neglected the family and their daughter's care because she was spending all her time on community politics and fighting you. He's going for full custody. Says she's unstable." I sat in my truck at the dark waterfront, phone pressed against my ear, Robert's words echoing in the silence, processing what he'd just told me with a growing sense of horror that felt like ice water spreading through my veins. Victoria's husband had left, taken the kids, taken Emma, the daughter who needed her mother, who needed consistency and routine and specialized care. The daughter who had been, if I was honest with myself, probably the real reason Victoria wanted the waterfront access in the first place. I'd wanted to protect my property, yes, to stand up for what was legally and morally right, to defend boundaries that needed defending, but had I considered what it would actually cost her? Not just her HOA position, or her social standing, or her reputation in the neighborhood, but her marriage, her children, her daughter who depended on her for everything. My grandfather had stood his ground against every challenge, every pressure, every attempt to make him bend or compromise or share what was his by right. But he'd also died alone, estranged from most of his family, with only me there at the end, because everyone else had given up trying to maintain relationships with someone whose principles always mattered more than people. No wife, no children except the one daughter who'd left and never came back, who I'd never met because the breach was too deep to heal. Just his property and his principles intact, and a crushing, defining loneliness that had shaped his final decades. Was I headed down the same path? defending boundaries so fiercely that they became walls nobody could scale? The public apology happened 2 weeks later. Malcolm advised me not to attend. Robert recorded it and sent me the video. Victoria stood at the front reading from a prepared statement, voice barely above a whisper. She admitted acting beyond her authority, making false claims about attorney consultation, organizing trespass activities, damaging my reputation through social media campaigns. The room was silent when she finished. Robert said people looked shocked. The check for $25,000 arrived by certified mail. I deposited it and immediately wrote a check for $10,000 to the Georgia State Parks Foundation for public boat ramps. The rest went toward waterfront upgrades, dock repairs, boundary signage, security. Malcolm filed the criminal complaint. The DA's office charged Victoria with misdemeanor trespass. She resolved it with a plea: 60 hours community service, 1 year probation. Over the following month, Pine Ridge shores returned to normal. People waved when I drove past. A few invited me to gatherings, which I declined. Robert remained a friend, stopping by occasionally. He said the new board president was cautious, by the book. That suited me, but something had changed inside me. I'd won the legal battle, defended my property, stood my ground like my grandfather taught me. But every time I went to the waterfront now, I thought about Victoria's face when her board removed her, her husband leaving, her kids going with him. I'd wanted justice. I'd gotten it. But justice, I was learning, had a cost that extended beyond court filings and settlement checks. One afternoon in late September, a family I didn't recognize walked up to the marina entrance. They stood looking at the signs, debating. Eventually, the father called out, asking if they could fish for a couple hours. I talked with them. They were visiting relatives in Pine Ridge shores. The kids looked excited, holding cheap tackle boxes. I told them they could fish that afternoon. They thanked me and spent 4 hours on the dock. When they left, they cleaned up and thanked me again. That became the pattern. People asked. I said yes when I felt like it. The key difference was control. I made decisions based on my judgment, not because a board demanded it. Some neighbors never asked. Others approached occasionally, always courteous. The waterfront became what it should have been. Mine to share or not share, mine to protect, but the victory felt hollow in ways I hadn't expected. I'd protected the property, lost the community in the process. My grandfather had been right about standing your ground, but maybe he'd also been a warning I hadn't fully understood until now. 3 weeks later, I sat on the dock at dawn with my camera on its tripod, waiting for the light to change in that perfect liminal space between night and day when the world feels suspended and anything seems possible. September was fading into October, that transition period when Georgia couldn't decide if it wanted to be summer or fall. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the orange and pink sky like polished obsidian, creating a mirror world beneath the real one that seemed more peaceful than anything above the surface. A great blue heron landed 30 feet away, completely unconcerned by my presence, and began its ancient, patient hunt for fish with movements so slow and deliberate they seemed almost meditative. I adjusted my camera settings and started shooting, falling into the familiar rhythm that had always grounded me when nothing else could. Observe without judgment, wait without impatience. Capture the perfect moment when it presents itself. The legal battle was over. Victoria had completed her 60 hours of community service at a food bank downtown, had reportedly put her house on the market, was considering moving away to somewhere nobody knew her story or her failures. Her daughter, Emma, was living with Victoria's ex-husband in North Carolina, 3 hours away. Seeing her mother every other weekend under supervised visitation because the court had deemed Victoria an unstable influence. The neighborhood had accepted and adjusted to the new normal, which was really just the old normal with clearer, legally enforced boundaries and a shared understanding that some lines couldn't be crossed. But the experience had left marks deeper than property lines or legal settlements, had carved grooves into my psyche that I suspected would never fully heal or fade. I'd been forced to defend something that should have been unquestionable, to prove my right to control my own family's land. That kind of fight changes you fundamentally, reshapes you at a level you don't recognize until long after the battle ends. I thought about my grandfather often during those quiet October mornings at the waterfront, his weathered hands showing me how to read hydraulic pressure gauges, his patient voice explaining why boundaries mattered, not because of what they kept out, but because of what they protected within. He'd taught me about standing firm when tested, about knowing when to bend and when to break before you'd compromise on principles that defined who you were. But he'd also taught me, though he'd never intended this lesson, about the cost of being right, about how you can win every battle and still lose the war, about how isolation can feel like victory right up until the moment you realize you're completely, irreversibly alone. The sun climbed higher, warming the dock beneath me and burning off the morning mist that clung to the water's surface like reluctant dreams. I packed up the camera gear carefully, methodically, the way my grandfather had taught me to treat tools that mattered. I walked back toward the house, passing the professional signs that marked property boundaries with crystal clarity, impossible to misinterpret or ignore or pretend didn't exist. Private property, protected by law, defended in court, validated by every legal mechanism our society had created to preserve individual rights against collective pressure, but also protected by something less tangible and far more costly: the demonstrated willingness to stand firm even when the cost was higher than you'd calculated, even when winning felt like losing, even when being right meant being alone. Boundaries only worked when you enforced them consistently and without mercy. I'd learned that lesson the hardest way possible, had it burned into me by fire and fury and systematic harassment. But I'd also learned something my grandfather's ghost couldn't teach me. Something I was only beginning to understand in the hollow space where victory should have felt satisfying. Sometimes the boundary you defend most fiercely, the line you refuse to let anyone cross, no matter what the cost, becomes the wall that isolates you most completely from everything that makes life worth defending in the first place. The waterfront was mine, the victory was complete and legally unassailable. The law had held firm, the boundaries were clear, but the dock felt lonelier than it ever had before, even in the years after my grandfather died and I'd inherited this beautiful, peaceful, isolating sanctuary. And sitting there in the October dawn watching the heron hunt in perfect, patient silence, I wondered if maybe the real question wasn't whether you had the right to defend your boundaries. Of course you did. The law was clear, the principles were sound, the justice was real. The real question, the one that kept me awake at 3 a.m. staring at water-stained ceilings, was simpler and infinitely harder. What do you have left after you've defended everything and won completely? I didn't have an answer yet. Maybe I never would. The heron caught a fish, swallowed it whole, and flew away across the water toward the far shore, where other people's docks and other people's boundaries created other invisible lines nobody could see, but everyone understood. And in the end, maybe that was the real price of winning. Not the money, or the time, or the stress, or even the relationships that fractured under pressure, but the slow, quiet recognition that you can be absolutely, legally, morally right and still lose something that matters more than property lines or deeds or 52 years of continuous family ownership ever could. The water was still, the morning was beautiful, the victory was complete, and I had never felt more alone in my entire life.